So we're still mourning the death of former President Mwai Kibaki, the third president of the Republic of Kenya. Many people who've been here have told us their personal experiences working for and with the former president. Yesterday, for instance, we had a former provincial commissioner, Jafta Rugut, who worked with Kibaki, and he told us, in fact, Kibaki sort of made me the MP for Odaya, because now he was the president and he still needed to represent the people of Odaya constituency. So he'd send me and tell me, you know, there's this that we are doing, there's this the other that needs to happen, can you find out? So he ended up being Central PC and MP for Odaya, representing the president. Earlier we had the private secretary who was telling us the days that the president, how the president was spending his days in retirement. We've also spoken to the State House Controller, Matera Kereri, who was telling us about his association with the President Kibaki from the day the president became his lecturer at Makerere University to the day the president became his boss at the National Treasury in the Ministry of Finance, to the day the president became his boss in State House. They were very good friends. Let's not forget that Mwai Kibaki was an MP. He was MP in Nairobi, went to be MP in Odaya, and served as MP until 2012. All those years as a parliamentarian. He contributed to debate, he contributed to laws, he was leader of the official opposition, and in all those days that he was serving all those functions, there's something that he was doing for the country, and that was serving the country. If you talk about him as a member of parliament, what do you remember, CT?
Well, one thing that I do remember is one of those MPs who seemed to have had a permanent and pensionable job, because the duration of time he was member of parliament for Odaya, he remained so. And there was no interruption, none whatsoever. There are very, very few people who managed that feat. One of them was Daniel Arap Moi. It's odd. It's the president.
Did they retain him as the member of parliament by virtue of the fact that he was president? Same thing happened with Moi. He was retained as a member of parliament because he was president. Or did the people of Odaya actually feel that he was representing their needs as a member of parliament ought to do? Or was it because, look, you're not going to boot him out. He's the president of the country.
What are you asking?
You're going to keep him there. Was he retained? Because he said he remained there until there was an election. There were elections every 5 years, but he remained member of parliament. They kept voting him back in as member of parliament.
It was a requirement to be president. You had to be an MP.
Sure.
So the people of Odaya, knowing that they want to support their man to be the president, they also had to elect him.
This is it. This is what I'm saying. Had it been switched around, so it's almost as if you had no choice but to put him there.
You did have a choice.
So were you going to remove him? He's the president.
But then if you removed him...
it means that you don't want him to be president.
Exactly.
So who else were you going to have to champion your cause? Because consider, for instance, every president we've had, with the exception of one President Uhuru Kenyatta, they always retained their seat. Even when they were not the president. Jomo Kenyatta did that. Moi did that. Another gentleman who did that was Jeremiah Nyaga. That man was MP all his life.
All his life.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, you associated that seat with him.
Yes.
For as long as it appears like he wanted it. Because the guy at some point says, I'm taking a break of all, from all this.
Yes.
But remember, it's a feat that very few people have managed to achieve. So it tells you that the people whom he represented understood the importance of their son, and they wanted to support their son, come sunshine or rain.
In whichever way they could.
Yes.
Let's talk about how he was as a member of parliament then, and somebody who served as the Speaker of the National Assembly at a number of years when Mwai Kibaki was member of parliament for Odaya is Francis OLE KAPARO, who joins us now via video link. Bwana Speaker, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Order.
Order.
Speaker KAPARO, you were Speaker when Mwai Kibaki was a member of parliament and when Mwai Kibaki was leader of the official opposition. Tell us about Mwai Kibaki as leader of official opposition and how you interacted with him as the Speaker of the National Assembly.
Well, first of all, I would like to pass my heartfelt condolences to the family, friends, and the nation of Kenya for the loss of an illustrious son of Kenya, the late President Mwai Kibaki. He was indeed a gentleman. He was a very sharp debater and a person who rarely, and I repeat, rarely showed anger in public. He was a very good leader. I first met him when I was a young lawyer in Nyeri, and he was vice president and MP for Thaya in 1977. And I subsequently joined parliament when he was Minister for Health and joined the cabinet with him in 1991. And in the capacity of cabinet minister, we were asked towards the end or middle of 1991 to find 1992 to find out ways and means of revamping KANU on the onset of multipartyism. And he and I were members of a very small committee. And when the following day I approached him to seek his views on when we'll meet, he said, "You youngsters, you are fresher, and you guys can do better than some of us. So please try to find out the best ways." A few days later, he had left KANU and went to DP as the party leader. But subsequent to that, of course, the general elections of 1992 were held. He came in as a member of the opposition, along with other luminaries, including Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, Kenneth Matiba, and all. And he remained very focused, as always, on matters before the House, and contributed in a very, very informed manner. And rarely, and I repeat again, rarely was he drawn into any debate about personalities or things that didn't matter to the country. Subsequent to that, he later became the leader of the official opposition, and in that capacity, he did extremely well. And all along, his qualities of a good debater, a gentleman, and a patriot played out throughout his time. Subsequent to that, I also served as speaker when he became president. And I think everybody expected that with the change of regime, KANU leaving the scene and not coming into power, everybody expected that the speaker would be changed. And I expected the same. But he called me and said, "You have been doing well as speaker. You will continue to serve your country if you accept in that capacity." And he marshaled the numbers to make that happen, for which I'm eternally grateful. That was Kibaki, the man, the gentleman, the patriot, and a fine person.
You know, one of the things that Kenyans, should we say Africans, are known for is we are going to say obituarize, and we speak extremely well of people when they have gone into the afterlife. And it's like it's almost taboo to mention anything that may not seem like praiseworthy. Well,
you know,
yes,
indeed that is true.
Yes.
Indeed that is true. And I have always said to friends and foe alike, if you really want to say anything good about me, say when I'm alive. Because when you say it when I'm dead, I wouldn't hear it and it wouldn't matter. That is one thing that that is wrong with our society. And the other thing that I personally wouldn't like is this whole concept of displaying my body when I'm dead in public. I wouldn't like that. I don't know about others, but I wouldn't like it. I think a lot of people come there, they don't know you, they have no affection for you. It's just like a ratio. And anyway, that is life. That is how Kenyans are used to. But personally, I wouldn't like that to happen when I depart planet Earth.
Bwana KAPARO, are you saying that you're not going to view the former president yourself?
I'm not saying I'm not viewing. Personally, it is not personal. I'm just talking about myself.
You know,
when I depart.
You see, why I was saying what I said was because of one simple fact. When people are in positions like, say, the president, even like you, who held senior positions within our government, and you're a speaker, at some level, you become the property of the people. And there are many decisions you may not particularly agree with, but the decisions will be made on your behalf, whether you agree or not. What do you say?
Well, unfortunately, yes, that could happen, but I am also of the view that people must respect the wishes of the departed. But that's besides the point. The point is that was a very sharp brain. That was a gentleman that has no equal in Kenya. I think the nearest I could get to on the political scene, on matters of being good-mannered and gentleman, was the late Michael Kijana Wamalwa. People who rarely displayed anger in public, and people who are very articulate in matters debate. And I think the best way he did it to a person who was not behaving well while he was debating in the House, his put down has always been, we have been around. We have been around.
Yeah.
Telling that guy that I have a lot of experience, and I was here many, probably decades before you. And that was his most famous put down.
Sure. Bwana KAPARO, you talk about this brilliance. You talk about this, well-mannered articulation, this intelligence. What were some of the ways you saw these attributes being played out, whether it was as member of parliament, whether it was as president? How did you see these things being played out that could be examples of these things that you speak of?
Well, let me just give you a few examples. If you went to President Kibaki, as he then was, and gave him some gossip or some allegations against another person, his standard response was "Hiyo ni vitina," and I believed with all my heart that the late Kibaki never took gladly people who peddled falsehoods or people who went there to accuse others with lies. I remember also at some stage, some of his ministers, when I was speaker, at the early part of his presidency, some of the ministers went to President Kibaki to tell him to evict the late president, former President Moi, from his Kabarak residence, because according to them, that was a government property. It was never transferred to Moi, and he was no longer vice president because that residence was he occupied because he was vice president, and that he was no longer acting in government and therefore must be evicted. And when I got this news, I went to him and we chatted with him, and he not only told those people to keep off the late President Moi and the residents, but actually ordered that he be given title for that land. That was him.
Some would argue that that was Mwai Kibaki just going against the law. I mean, if the building was all along earmarked to be the residence of the vice president, the former president did not leave it for his vice presidents, he's continued to stay there, then that should have just been corrected. That, okay, Cabernet Gardens is the residence, the official residence of Kenya's vice president. Why normalize an anomaly?
That may be your argument, but look at it this way. I don't know how old you are in 1990, 1991, 1992.
I was a teenager.
Remember the kind of bitter politics between KANU and the opposition. We spilled over into the new parliament and into our society. It was very acrimonious. Look at it this way. Supposing those ministers were allowed to execute their thoughts and evicted former President Moi crudely, as they were about to do, what would have happened to the country called Kenya? And I read it the other day. I don't know whether it was yesterday. The former minister, I think he was then Minister for Justice, Kiraito Murongi, I don't know what portfolio he was holding at that time, saying they wanted to jail Moi. I mean, if that kind of thing happened, you wouldn't be sitting in the Kenya in which we are sitting today. But finally, the law as it was then, all public land vested in the president, and the president had power to grant that land to anybody he wanted. It wasn't corruption because Moi never sought for it. It was the gesture of the president to bestow that piece of land to a person who has occupied it for over 3 decades. That's my understanding, and I think it was the right thing to do. I still think that if you did the opposite, it wouldn't have been in the best interest of the Kenyan people.
So it was a statesmanly thing to do for the greater good of the country called Kenya. Are there other instances where, when he was serving as president and you were Speaker of the National Assembly, that you look back and you think, were it not for the president's intervention or direction on this particular matter, would not have been where we are today?
Yes, indeed, there are many instances. You remember, for example, the issue of the Atu brothers. You remember that?
Yes.
You know, that matter was very acrimonious. That matter came to Parliament, and I ruled against the. You know what happened is, as that saga of the two brothers was raging, a member of parliament brought a motion to the House. Meanwhile, the executive set up a commission, I believe,
Yep.
a committee to deal with it. And the minister then in charge of security, the late Michuki, came to the House and said, because we have set up a commission to deal with that matter, this matter should not be discussed in the House. And I ruled against that. I said Parliament is superior than executive ministerial action. And finally, you as minister have a responsibility and a duty to answer to the National Assembly and through it to the Kenyan people what this issue is all about. And you know, the whole executive was really mad with me which I was used to anyway, because as Speaker, you shouldn't ever, ever attempt to please any part or any party or any group. You have to do what is right and what is within the law and what is in the best public interest. And when the executive were mad about this, and they went to the president to talk about it, then the president told him that the speaker is right, and it is his duty to interpret the law and to make rulings on behalf of the National Assembly, and that you must abide by it. That was him. Played by the law, accept what the House said, and respond to it.
Very good. We'll get more gems from you shortly after this quick break. We're speaking with the former National Assembly Speaker, Francis Ole KAPARO, who served as Speaker of the National Assembly, who served with President Kibaki in cabinet, served as Speaker of the National Assembly when President Kibaki was an opposition member of parliament, rising to the lead of official opposition, rising to the president, and KAPARO was still there as Mr. Order in the National Assembly. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. 8:30, we are live on KTN Home, on SpiceFM, and online on Facebook and YouTube.
This is the Situation Room.
It continues. Eric Latif, Nduoko, C.T. Muga, and former National Assembly Speaker Francis Ole KAPARO, who joins us on video link. We are talking about his memories and his tribute to former President Mwai Kibaki.
Bwana KAPARO, with an eye on Parliament, as we're looking at how things were run, looking at the time of former President Kibaki, would you say that Parliament was beholden to the executive, or that, as we have been given many examples, once the president said, here's your job, do it, people were allowed to go ahead and do what they needed to do? Did Parliament do its job of oversight, legislation and representation, or was there some kind of attitude of being beholden to the executive?
Well, let me just repeat what I said earlier, that President Kibaki truly believed in and respected Parliament, a place he was almost more than half his life. And you also recall that when Greenhorns brought a little trouble as he was debating, his common response was, we have been here. He respected Parliament immensely. Not one day, not one single day did he ever call me a speaker complaining about the activities of Parliament. And you know, at that time, as I said, there were many, many funny issues involving the House. There were issues of Anglo-leasing, there were issues of the Aturu brothers. Subsequently, of course, there was that division of government heading towards the referendum of 2000, I believe, 2005 or 2006. He never interfered. And I can also say, as the person holding the position then, Parliament executed its mandate to the fullest. I will also go back and say, even during the tenure of President Mwai Kibaki, and as you know, he was a very strong person. I always made sure that the executive never, and I repeat, never, hampered what Parliament was supposed to do in the execution of its mandate. I also remember at some stage when the Honorable Kimunya was Minister of Finance, and I believe it was during the Anglo-leasing saga, and he was unwilling or unable to give a satisfactory answer to Parliament, and showed some disrespect to Parliament. I ordered him not to contribute in his Parliament, until such time as he respected the House. And I kept that very strongly. And the Honorable Care, I think, executed that mandate until he came to apologize to the House. So that was what it was. And that is, I believe, what should be, that Parliament must execute its mandate to bring to account the executive, because that is the prime reason why you have Parliament in the first place. If Parliament cannot and will not bring the executive to account for its deeds or misdeeds, then it loses the very reason why it exists.
So you served as the head of an arm of government when Moi was in State House and then when Kibaki was in State House. How would you compare the Moi State House to the Kibaki State House as a head of an arm of government?
Well, the Moi State House was very busy. It was always busy. There were always many people visiting, ministers, MPs, ordinary citizens, and the like. Mike Kibaki's State House was quite private. You hardly got mobs there. Very rare did you get mobs there. People were allowed or ordered to do their job from their offices, and not just to litter around this.
Of course, there was also the issue of looking at the accusations in the first couple of years of the Kibaki presidency that, he has come in and because of the fallout of the Bomas constitutional talks, which members of parliament were delegates of the constitutional conference, that because of the mismanagement of the members of parliament associated with the government then, Kibaki was then accused of, perpetrating tribalism and all. Did you witness that? What was your view at that point when everybody else was talking about, okay, so this Kibaki presidency has let out the dreams of the country and we are back to tribal politics?
Well, first of all, let's also put everything in perspective. You will all remember, if you went back to your records and history, you'll find out that the Honorable Mike Kibaki became president on a wheelchair. He had been involved in an accident just before the election. So he became president sick, physically sick, on a wheelchair. Subsequent to that, he also had a major stroke, and he was hospitalized for a while. And because of the stroke, he had also lost a fair amount, I believe, of his faculty. Therefore, a lot of people around him took to managing political affairs and government, and maybe they did so with inexperience, and maybe also with some vindictiveness. And that led, that played out in Bomas. For a while, I attended Bomas, and subsequently I got out of it when I realized that it was becoming too partisan. And because finally that document would come to the House, or the debate arising out of it will come to the House, I thought it was not right for me to continue participating in a very divisive activity, which will finally come to the House, and I would be required to make an impartial ruling on it. And therefore, I agree that there were some people who took advantage of those two instances, particularly the second, when the president suffered a stroke to run government the way they wanted. And in doing so, because of their inexperience, they made a couple of mistakes or several mistakes. And I can also tell you, when NAC took over power in 2002, for the first 6 months, we had a government that was acting like the opposition. And we had an opposition that was timid, thinking it was still in government because it was being accused of all the ills that ailed Kenya. And therefore, we had a situation for 6 or 9 months where you didn't know who was government and who was opposition. That was how it was.
I think since the demise of former President Kibaki as well, Bwana KAPARO, we've heard many times, just in this week alone, that there are many who felt that if, perchance he was given more time as president, that we would maybe have seen even better performance of the country at whatever level. Do you agree with this sentiment?
I do, but unfortunately, we couldn't go back to where we came from, where there was a perpetual presidency. It was good that we had term limits for president, and however good a president is, we must have an end to that reign so that we get somebody else. But yes, he did extremely well for the economy, for the infrastructure, and for bringing politics of hate down. The only unfortunate bit is that NAC inherited a country or a society that was very, very hopeful upon the election of NAC and therefore President Mwai Kibaki. And the Kenyans were extremely happy and hopeful people. And that was an occasion to unite our country. And that was the time that we could have killed tribalism altogether. That was also the time we could have tackled corruption completely. But unfortunately, none of the two was done. And therefore, a few years later, our society returned to normal, and we became the usual tribal thieving society, which is very unfortunate, and it could have been done so. But President Mwai, yes, he did extremely well, but no, he shouldn't have gone on beyond his term limit.
There are also those who argue that, yes, even with the powers that were given to the president at that particular point in our history, that the presidency is a little more complicated than what we ordinary citizens think, and that the president can't actually do what he wants to do. You've been close to power and you have had power. What do you say to this?
Well, let's face a few facts. Factor number one is that our society should be and ought to be a society governed by laws, not by whims of an individual. That's one. Number two, any person becoming president remains a human being. And as a human being, is subject to all human frailties. They can make mistakes, they can be biased, they can also favor and all those kind of things. So it is a very complicated thing, balancing the personal, balancing the law, balancing the public good. And there's also something called the unwritten law. What you think is right, even though it is not expressly provided by law. You must have the 6th or 7th sense to find out what is good for society, what is good for the country, beyond what is written and beyond what you are told.
Well, you put it very, very well indeed. But still, you've given us an academic perspective of the subject. But having been in power, what I'm getting at is simply this.
Can I just tell you this?
Please do.
I am not giving you an academic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you what I did as Speaker. I had to say no, even though it's not written, if I thought it was in the best interest of our country.
I believe,
I'm telling you what I practiced.
I think in making this statement, you've actually answered my question more comprehensively, because that indicates that there were limits to what even the executive could do. Why I ask this question is because one of the things that one sees in our political scene is the current president, former, being blamed for literally anything that goes wrong in the country. And the underlying assumption is that the president has the power to set these things right, or the president has the power to make decisions that would set these things right. And I'm saying, yes, the president may have the ability and the power to do certain things, but not all the powers that we assume they have.
Exactly. You are absolutely right. And you are right because of this. Why do we make the statement that the government has three arms? It is because there are some functions solely preserved for the executive. There are others solely preserved for the legislature. And there are others solely preserved for the judiciary. And you know, there is no one single arm of government that can do whatever it wishes independently. I think the three arms must be interdependent. And if one arm of government slackens or does something wrong, then you will accuse the president. For example, when the judiciary is unable or unwilling to decide matters on corruption, cases sent to parliament, to court by the executive on people who are accused of corruption, and those things continue forever, you will accuse the president of not being able to tackle corruption, and yet the president cannot judge those accused. It must be somebody else. What about if something else requires legislation and the National Assembly, or as the case now is, the parliament, both the Senate and the legislature, are unable to execute the mandate? You will again accuse the president. But if the president tries to correct that situation and accuses, say, for example, the judiciary correctly of failing to do something that ought to be done, the natural response would be that the president is undermining the independence of the judiciary. And the same thing would happen if he took on head-on the legislature. He will be accused of undermining the independence of parliament. So sometimes, you know, you walk a tightrope. But in an ideal situation, everybody should be executing their mandate correctly and in the best interest of the country. I am not personally satisfied today that the other two arms of government are doing what they ought to do in the best interest of our country.
Okay, well, if we can go back to that time, Bona KAPARO, and say that there were things that would mar the Kibaki presidency. And now we look at post-election violence, now which happened in his second term. And there were members of parliament who served with him in parliament in the first term. And we saw the terrible things that happened in the country. Many have castigated and said that he did not come out publicly in a manner in which he would ask the country to say, we are, we feel terrible for these things that have happened, but how can we find a way to move on? Did we see a situation? Did we see a situation where Parliament, for example, under your watch, would have been able to say, can we do something about this? This is one of the things that would mar his presidency 10 years down the line.
Well, I was Speaker under Kibaki presidency for one term, and that was 2002 to 2007. And the political violence arose, and the mismanagement of that election arose into end of 2007. Spilling to 2008. And therefore, I wasn't the speaker then. I was speaker before the event. But if you also will remember, that political violence came as a result of a disputed election. And the election results were announced a few days later. And once the election was announced, I ceased to be speaker. But yes, that was wrong. I mean, we should never, ever, ever do things on matters election that can arouse the public to dispute the results in a credible manner. I think the Electoral Commission must do its part, must be allowed to function the best way it can, and it must also do what it is in the best interest of the country. Yes, that election of 2007 marred the record of President Kibaki, and it must be a culmination of things done by, if I know Kibaki well, by people associated with him, and finally executed, and he being told this is the right thing. But I wasn't there. I really can't speak for him because I wasn't present when finally the decisions were made about the bungled election. But please, on record, I wasn't speaker after that election.
Had you been, let's play in that space for a moment. Had you been seeing everything that had happened, what do you think would have been some of your sentiments then that would have been expressed publicly and would have been the rallying call in the House and also to your president?
Can I get that back again?
Yes. Let's play within that space for some time and say, had you been speaker at that time, had you still been within the walls of Parliament, what would have been some of the things that you would have expressed publicly and then even asked of your president?
Well, it's very difficult to speculate. And also we must understand that the speaker has no role in management of the election. And further, the speaker has absolutely no role in resolving the dispute arising out of a disputed election. That the mandate of executing the election is with the Electoral Commission, and the resolving dispute is within the mandate of the judiciary. But I have a little experience on hostile politics arising out of hotly contested election, because I became speaker in 1993 when the country went through a very hotly contested and hostile electioneering period, to the extent that when members of the House came to the House, and they were evenly divided, 100 for the opposition and 112 for the government. The members came to the House with a lot of bitterness and hatred to one another, to the extent that for almost half a year they were not speaking to one another. And it is the business of the Speaker to bring them together. And I tried the best I could to bring them together. And they indeed came together. And finally, we had a functional parliament. And I believe even after 2008, 2008, heading forward after that violence in the parliament, I believe also the Speaker should and ought to have bring the temperatures down. But you remember again, it was also very, 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 very hotly disputed, and it took the intervention of the international community to craft together what came to be known as the Grand Coalition Government.
That's true.
Which in effect meant a single party parliament. Again, it wasn't by law, but the Grand Coalition Government and therefore Parliament was a single party.
It brought everybody together. But as Speaker, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning, and thank you for sharing your thoughts, your sentiments, and your tributes to the former President Mwai Kibaki. We thank you very much. Next time, Bwana Speaker, we hope that you will be able to join us in the studio. We've invited you a number of times. We always thank you for speaking to us on the phone. Next one, utakuwa hapa ndani.
Asante, tutakuweko kama tutapata mafuta ya kutembea.
That's a good one.